In the bustling streets of San Francisco, the year was 1941, and the air was filled with an excitement that came with summer. The sounds of children playing, vendors shouting their wares, and the distant roar of the Pacific Ocean mingled together, creating a vibrant tapestry of life. Among those who walked the sunlit streets was a man who had captured the hearts of many, a man named Joe DiMaggio. He was a baseball legend, revered not only for his remarkable talent but for his charm and unwavering spirit. Joe was more than just a player, he was an icon. With his striking good looks and effortless swing, he became the pride of the New York Yankees, a team that had risen to legendary status. Fans knew him for his 13 seasons in the major leagues, but it was his 56 consecutive games hitting streak that had cemented his legacy in the annals of baseball history. Yet, this story is not solely about the accolades and applause that followed him, it is about a man who faced an internal battle as great as any on the field. As the world lurched into chaos with the outbreak of World War II, the thrill of baseball dimmed in the shadow of global conflict. Joe DiMaggio found himself at a crossroads. The call to serve his country grew louder with every passing day. Many of his fellow players enlisted, leaving behind the diamond for the trenches. While the allure of fame beckoned, a deeper sense of duty stirred within him. It was a decision that would change the course of his life forever. In early 1943, Joe made the choice that shocked fans across the nation. He walked away from the roaring crowds, the cheers of adoring fans, and the comforts of his celebrity lifestyle to enlist in the United States Army Air Forces. Friends and family were taken aback. After all, he was at the peak of his career. Yet, in Joe's eyes, the call of duty was irresistible. He understood that greatness extended beyond the baseball field. As he arrived at the training base, the reality of military life settled in. Gone were the luxury suites and the adoration, in their place were barracks, drills, and a rigorous regimen. He was no longer Joe DiMaggio, the star athlete, he was Private DiMaggio. The transformation was stark and profound. In the early morning hours, he would rise with the sun, the air filled with the sounds of commands and the distant thud of marching boots. Despite the rigors of training, Joe found solace in the camaraderie that formed among the men. They were all there for a common purpose, united by a singular goal. They shared laughter, stories of home, and, at times, the weight of their fears. Joe, with his natural leadership qualities, became a source of inspiration. His presence offered a flicker of hope amidst the uncertainty and trepidation that surrounded them. As the months passed, the reality of their mission became increasingly clear. Joe was deployed overseas, and the weight of his new responsibilities pressed heavily on his shoulders. He traded the green pastures of the baseball diamond for the desolate landscapes of war-torn Europe. The noise that filled the air now was not the crack of a bat but the thunder of artillery. With each mission, the stakes rose higher. Joe had undergone training as a flight engineer, which meant he was responsible for ensuring the aircraft ran smoothly. It was a job that required precision, quick thinking, and courage, qualities Joe had honed on the field. But now, the intensity was palpable. The enemy was real, and the consequences were dire. One fateful day, during a routine bombing run, the tension reached a boiling point. The crew faced enemy fire, and Joe found himself in a harrowing situation. He worked tirelessly, his hands steady as he repaired a critical system mid-flight while bullets rained down around him. In that moment, he was reminded of the baseball diamond, the pressure to perform under scrutiny. But this was life and death, not just a game. The experience changed him. The thrill of the game was replaced by the seriousness of survival. When the crew returned home, many were haunted by what they had witnessed, and Joe was no exception. He had traded the cheers of the crowd for the sound of silence in the face of tragedy. The laughter of his comrades was now tinged with a bittersweet understanding of the fragility of life. After months in service, the war began to shift. Victory was inching closer, but the toll was heavy. Joe, once a symbol of joy and triumph, bore the weight of grief and loss. He witnessed friends fall, heroes lost to the ravages of war. Each loss carved deeper lines on his spirit, changing him in ways he struggled to articulate. He was a soldier now, and the battlefield would forever alter his perception of life. As the war came to a close in 1945, Joe returned to the United States, stepping off the plane to a country that had changed almost as much as he had. The streets of San Francisco bore the familiar sights, yet a sense of unease lingered. The cheers he had once taken for granted now felt distant. The fans who had idolized him were there, but the sparkle of celebrity felt dimmed by the shadows of war. Joe DiMaggio had fought valiantly, sacrificing the glory of his prime for the call of duty, but he returned forever changed. The laughter and light that had once come so easily now felt more complicated. The battle scars of war were etched deep within, far beyond anything that could be seen. He was no longer just a ballplayer, he was a man who had faced the darkest corners of humanity. It was in this moment of reflection that Joe began to find his true purpose. He recognized that the struggles he had faced were not merely his alone but shared by countless others who had served. There was a bond forged in sacrifice, a brotherhood that transcended the game. He began to understand that his story could inspire others to confront their own struggles, to find hope in despair, and to forge a path forward. As he stepped back into the world of baseball, there was an unspoken understanding: the field would always be his refuge, but the legacy he wished to leave would extend far beyond his batting average. Joe DiMaggio had become more than a hero on the diamond, he had become a voice for those who had served, a beacon of hope for a nation striving to heal. For those who followed his journey, there was a reminder that not all heroes wore capes, some wore uniforms and some wore the scars of battle. The story of Joe DiMaggio is a testament to the human spirit, a call to remember the sacrifices of those who fought for freedom. And as the sun set over the San Francisco Bay, it was clear that his journey was only beginning, an unfolding narrative that would inspire generations to come. If you found the journey of Joe DiMaggio compelling, stay tuned for more stories from history that remind us of the courage and resilience within us all. Subscribe to our channel for more tales that echo through time, where the past meets the present in remarkable ways. As he arrived at the training base, the reality of military life hit Joe like a cold splash of water. The sounds of early mornings filled with shouts and the clanking of boots echoed around him, a sharp contrast to the cheers of the baseball stadium. He stood amidst a sea of soldiers, all clad in crisp uniforms, their faces reflecting a mix of determination and fear. For a man who had faced the pressures of the big leagues, the stakes now felt impossibly higher. Days turned into weeks as Joe immersed himself in the grueling training regimen. They ran endless drills, learned how to manage weapons, and adapted to the rigid structure of military life. It was a world far removed from the baseball diamond, but Joe approached it with the same fierce dedication he had shown in every game. He was not just a star athlete anymore, he was a soldier, and he would do everything in his power to serve his country. The camaraderie he found among his fellow trainees was unlike anything he had experienced before. They were a ragtag bunch, hailing from different walks of life, yet bound by a shared purpose. They laughed together, shared stories of home, and forged friendships that transcended their differences. Joe found himself opening up in ways he never had before, sharing his fears and aspirations with men who understood the weight of their sacrifice. However, the realities of war were ever present, lurking in the corners of their training sessions. As Joe learned to fly planes, he could not shake the feeling of responsibility that weighed on him. Every time he climbed into a cockpit, he was reminded that these machines were not just tools for combat, they were lifelines for his comrades and a means to protect the very nation he loved. He trained with fervor, determined to master every aspect of flying, knowing that his skills would one day save lives. As months passed, the hustle and bustle of San Francisco faded into memory. The cheers from the crowd were replaced by the solemnity of duty. Letters from fans poured in, filled with encouragement and admiration for his bravery. But as he read those words, a sense of longing grew within him. He missed the game, the rush of standing at bat, the roar of the crowd when he hit a home run. Yet, deep down, he knew he had made the right choice. He was part of something greater than himself, a fight for freedom that extended far beyond the baseball diamond. Finally, the day came when Joe's training concluded. He received orders that would take him across the Atlantic to fight in the European theater. The news was bittersweet, he was proud to serve, but the thought of leaving his comrades behind filled him with apprehension. On the day of his departure, he stood in formation with his fellow soldiers, the weight of their collective responsibility hanging heavy in the air. The last sight of the training base would forever be etched in his memory. As the plane soared through the sky, Joe looked out at the clouds, pondering the journey that lay ahead. He found comfort in the fact that he was not alone in this fight. Many of his childhood heroes had answered the call, sacrificing their glory for the greater good. The likes of Ted Williams and Bob Feller had also traded their bats for rifles, and Joe took solace in knowing that they were all part of a larger brotherhood. Arriving in Europe felt surreal. The beauty of the landscape was overshadowed by the grim reality of war that lay ahead. Joe quickly immersed himself in his duties, flying reconnaissance missions over enemy territory. Each flight was a test of skill and bravery, forcing him to confront the dangers that came with being a pilot in wartime. He soared high above the clouds, but the knowledge that below him lay the chaos of war never left his mind. The sounds of gunfire and explosions occasionally echoed in the distance, reminding him that he was far from the safety of home. Every mission brought with it the risk of not returning, and with that came a heavy burden of responsibility. He thought of the fans who had cheered for him, the young boys who looked up to him as a role model. The weight of their expectation pressed down on him, but it was nothing compared to the weight of those who depended on him in the skies. As the months rolled by, Joe began to change. The carefree spirit he once embodied on the baseball field was tempered by the harsh realities of war. He learned to appreciate the simple moments, a shared meal with fellow soldiers, a letter from home, or the quiet camaraderie in the barracks. Each experience shaped him into a man forged by the fire of war, yet he could never fully shake the memories of the field. The crack of the bat, the thrill of a home run, and the adoration of the crowd lingered in the back of his mind. One fateful day, during a routine mission, Joe found himself in a harrowing dogfight with enemy aircraft. The adrenaline surged through him as he deftly maneuvered his plane, a dance of life and death unfolding in the sky. The stakes were high, the consequences severe. In that moment, he understood that he was fighting not just for his life, but for the lives of those who served alongside him. The experience was a crucible, one that would leave its mark on him forever. After the dogfight, as he landed safely back at the base, Joe realized that he had emerged from that encounter a different man. The thrill of the game and the roar of the crowd felt distant now. In their place was a deep sense of purpose. He was no longer just Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player, he was Joe DiMaggio, a soldier who had found his courage amidst chaos. As the war raged on, Joe's heart remained torn. He fought for his country, yet he longed for the life he had left behind. As he reflected on the price of glory, he understood that true greatness comes not from fame and accolades, but from serving something far greater than oneself. The lessons he learned in the skies would shape him as profoundly as any game he had ever played. If you find these stories of bravery and sacrifice captivating, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Join us as we delve deeper into the lives of those who lived through World War II, exploring their triumphs, struggles, and the legacies they left behind. As he arrived at the training base, the reality of military life struck Joe DiMaggio like a fastball to the chest. The sun blazed down on the dusty ground, and the sounds of barking sergeants and marching boots filled the air. No longer was he the golden boy of baseball, adored by millions. He was now just another recruit, stripped of his fame and fortune, ready to embrace a different kind of challenge. The initial days were grueling. Joe found himself surrounded by men from all walks of life, each with their own stories and dreams. Some were farmers, others factory workers, and a few were even former athletes like him. They all shared a common purpose, but the camaraderie was forged in sweat and fatigue. The harsh training regimen demanded physical endurance and mental toughness. Joe pushed through the pain, drawing strength from the memories of the baseball diamond, where he had learned the value of perseverance and teamwork. As weeks turned into months, Joe acclimated to his new reality. The drills became routine, and the weight of a rifle felt strangely familiar, like holding a baseball bat in his grip. Yet, in quiet moments, the shadows of doubt crept in. He missed the joy of the game, the thrill of a home run, the cheers of the crowd, and the simple pleasure of a summer's day spent on the field. But duty called louder than the siren song of the baseball park. He knew he had a role to play, and he embraced it fully. In the evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the base, Joe gathered with his fellow recruits. They shared stories, laughter, and dreams of home. He became a source of inspiration for many, not because of his fame, but due to his unwavering resolve. He reminded them that even heroes come from ordinary backgrounds, and it was their duty to fight for the freedom they often took for granted. One day, during a particularly rigorous training exercise, Joe fell hard while maneuvering through an obstacle course. Dust and dirt clouded the air as he hit the ground with a thud. The recruits paused, their hearts in their throats. But Joe picked himself up, dusted off his uniform, and offered a reassuring smile. "You'll never get anywhere without a few scrapes," he quipped, eliciting laughter that broke the tension. In that moment, he wasn't just Joe DiMaggio, the baseball star, he was Joe, their comrade, embodying resilience in the face of adversity. As the months wore on, news from the front lines trickled in, revealing the harsh realities of war. The stories of bravery and sacrifice moved Joe deeply, igniting a fire within him. He wanted to do more than just train, he wanted to contribute directly to the effort. He was soon given the chance to serve as a member of a bomber crew, flying missions across the European theater. The gravity of this new responsibility weighed heavily on him, but it also filled him with purpose. The first time Joe climbed aboard a B-17 bomber, he felt a mix of pride and trepidation. The aircraft's massive frame loomed before him, a stark reminder of the dangers they would face. As the engines roared to life, he looked around at his fellow crew members. They were young men, many just out of their teens, their faces a blend of excitement and fear. Joe offered a reassuring nod, his presence providing a sense of stability amidst the uncertainty. During those harrowing missions, Joe found himself facing challenges far greater than any he had encountered on the baseball field. The sky was filled with flak and enemy fire, and the adrenaline surged through his veins. Each flight tested his courage and resolve in ways he had never imagined. The camaraderie with his crew deepened as they faced the perils of war together. They became brothers, bound by shared experiences and a commitment to protect one another. Yet, amid the thrill of flying and the bond he forged with his crewmates, there were moments that haunted him. The devastation he witnessed during sorties weighed heavily on his heart. The roar of engines was sometimes drowned out by the cries of those who had suffered. He had traded the cheers of a baseball crowd for the silence that often followed the chaos of battle. Each mission was a balancing act between hope and despair, and Joe learned that bravery came with a heavy price. As the war progressed, Joe DiMaggio found himself transforming in ways he had never anticipated. The man who once thrived in the spotlight now operated under a mantle of humility and sacrifice. He became aware that while his past accomplishments were significant, they paled in comparison to the lives being lost and changed forever in the theater of war. The fame he had once reveled in now seemed trivial against the backdrop of history being written in blood and valor. In the quiet moments between missions, Joe often thought of baseball. He envisioned the green fields, the crack of the bat, and the thrill of victory. Yet, he also understood that the game he loved would be forever altered by the war. He found himself reflecting on what it meant to be a hero. It was about more than just talent, it was about heart, sacrifice, and the willingness to stand up for what is right. He realized that every man and woman serving in uniform wore the badge of a hero, even if they never stepped onto a field of glory. As the war drew closer to its conclusion, Joe DiMaggio returned home, forever changed. The cheers that greeted him were not just for the baseball legend but for the man who had faced the trials of war. He carried the weight of his experiences, a blend of pride, sorrow, and hope for the future. The nation welcomed him back, but he had learned that true greatness lay not solely in applause, but in the strength of character forged through hardship. With each passing day, Joe became a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He understood that, though he had traded the diamond for duty, he had gained something far more profound, a deeper understanding of life, sacrifice, and the ties that bind humanity together. His journey was a reminder that while glory can fade, the impact of one's choices and actions endures, resonating through the lives of those touched by them. And so, as he took his place in the world once more, Joe DiMaggio encouraged others to embrace their own callings, to serve with honor, and to remember those who had sacrificed for the freedoms they cherished. The diamond may have faded from view, but the lessons learned in the crucible of war would echo throughout his life, urging everyone to recognize the strength within themselves and the importance of standing up for a better tomorrow. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more stories of heroism and sacrifice from those who shaped our world. As the hustle and bustle of San Francisco faded into memory, the cheers from the crowd were replaced by the sounds of engines roaring and the wind whipping past the cockpit. Joe DiMaggio, once a beloved figure on the baseball diamond, now found himself navigating a new reality high above the clouds. The thrill of flying was intoxicating, yet it was laced with a profound sense of gravity. Each flight was a lesson not just in aviation but in the complexities of duty and sacrifice. The air over the training fields was thick with anticipation as Joe and his fellow pilots prepared for significant maneuvers. On the surface, the camaraderie between them felt like a continuation of the locker room banter he had known for years. Yet, beneath the light-hearted jokes and shared meals lay an unspoken understanding of the risks they were all taking. With each ascension into those azure skies, the stakes became clearer. They were preparing not just for a test of skill, but for a battle that would determine the fate of many. Joe had quickly gained respect among his peers. His ability to learn and adapt was admirable, but it was his humility that truly endeared him to the men around him. He listened intently to their stories, some filled with laughter, others tinged with sorrow. There was Michael, a mechanic from Ohio, who had enlisted to serve his family and honor his brother who had been lost in the early battles of the Pacific. There was Samuel, a young man from Texas, who spoke of his dreams of returning home to start a life after the war. It was through these conversations that Joe found a deeper purpose. He was not merely flying to serve his country, but to preserve the dreams and lives of those he had come to care for. As the weeks turned into months, the training intensified. Joe faced challenges that tested his resolve. The grueling schedules left little room for rest, and the pressure to excel weighed heavily upon him. He pushed through the fatigue, each day reminding himself of the purpose behind his struggle. He believed in the cause, and with every flight, he felt himself growing not just as a pilot, but as a man. The moment came when Joe and his squadron were finally deemed ready for deployment. The news was met with a mixture of excitement and dread. They had trained hard, but now the reality of war loomed large ahead of them. Joe stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his uniform, and for a brief moment, he saw the reflection of the man he used to be. The baseball star was still there, but he felt the weight of a new identity settle onto his shoulders. He was a soldier now, and with that came an unyielding sense of duty. The day they boarded the transport plane was surreal. As they flew toward their destination, Joe looked out at the clouds below, wondering what awaited them. The vastness of the sky was both liberating and daunting. The men around him shared nervous glances, some offering quiet encouragement while others gazed silently into the horizon. Joe closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, reminding himself of the reasons they were there. This was about more than just him. It was about family, freedom, and the hope of returning home. When they touched down on foreign soil, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air was thick with tension, and the sounds of war were a stark contrast to the tranquil skies they had flown through. Joe stepped off the plane, his heart racing as he took in the unfamiliar sights and sounds. The world around him felt surreal, a landscape marred by conflict, yet still hauntingly beautiful. The days turned into a blur of missions, training exercises, and brief moments of respite. Each flight was a test of their skills, but it was the camaraderie that truly sustained them. Joe found himself growing closer to his fellow pilots, sharing laughter during breaks and supporting one another through the challenges they faced. He learned to lean on them, just as they leaned on him, finding strength in their shared vulnerabilities. As the weeks passed, the reality of battle became increasingly evident. The first time Joe was deployed on a combat mission, a mixture of adrenaline and fear coursed through his veins. The aircraft roared to life beneath him, and as he took to the skies, he was acutely aware of the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. He was no longer just Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player. He was a man on a mission, tasked with a duty that transcended his previous life. With each mission, Joe's resolve grew stronger. He witnessed the horrors of war firsthand. Friends he had trained with were lost in the blink of an eye, their lives extinguished far too soon. The laughter he once shared with them echoed in his mind as he flew through a battle-torn sky. Each loss haunted him, a reminder of the fragility of life. It was a harsh awakening, one that reshaped his understanding of victory and defeat. Through it all, Joe clung to the memory of home. He thought of the cheers from the crowd at Yankee Stadium, the warmth of the sun on his face during a summer game, and the simple joy of sharing a meal with loved ones. These memories fueled his determination to fight for a future where such moments would be possible for everyone. He reminded himself constantly that they were not just engaged in a fight for survival, they were part of a larger story of hope and resilience. As the war raged on, the friendships forged in the heat of battle became his lifeline. They celebrated small victories together, and in their darkest moments, they lifted each other up. Joe learned the power of connection, realizing that it was the bonds of friendship that would help them endure even the toughest days. He was no longer just a player in a game, he was part of a team fighting for their very existence. The experience changed him, shaping his perspective in ways he could never have anticipated. His time in the military was not just a chapter in his life, it became a defining moment that would influence the man he would become. As he flew through the skies, a soldier among soldiers, he felt a fire igniting within him, a fire that would burn bright long after the war was over. And when the war finally drew to a close, Joe would return home, a hero in the eyes of many, but forever changed by the experiences he had faced. He would carry the weight of memories, of friends lost and lessons learned, into a world that seemed both familiar and foreign. The journey had shaped him, and as he stepped off that plane at the end of it all, he knew he would never be the same man who had traded the baseball diamond for the cockpit. If you found Joe's story compelling, if it touched your heart, consider subscribing to our channel. Join us as we delve deeper into the lives of heroes, exploring the stories that shaped history and the lessons that resonate through time. Joe fell hard while maneuvering through an obstacle course. Dust swirled around him as he landed on the unforgiving earth, the wind knocked out of his lungs. Pain shot through his body, but it was the humiliation that stung the most. As he lay there, the laughter of his comrades echoed in his ears, but it wasn't mocking, it was a bond forged in shared struggle. They were all in this together, and they all knew that everyone had their off days. "Get up, DiMaggio. You've got a war to win," a voice called out, laced with good-natured ribbing. With a grunt, Joe pushed himself back to his feet, dusting off his fatigues. The moment had turned into a rallying call, and he felt the warmth of camaraderie wrap around him like a blanket. He couldn't help but smile, a smile that held the weight of shared determination and the flicker of hope. As the weeks progressed, the training grew more intense and the days longer. The sergeants expected more, pushing their recruits to test the limits of their physical and mental endurance. Joe found himself constantly at the edge, but he leaned on the principles he had learned from baseball: focus, teamwork, and most importantly, perseverance. The field had taught him how to deal with pressure, and he applied those lessons to his new life. Though he was no longer swinging a bat, the fight was just as real, and he was determined to give it his all. One night, while sitting around a flickering campfire, Joe shared stories of his previous life, painting vivid images of the ballparks, the fans, and the magic of the game. His comrades listened, rapt with attention, and for a brief moment, the weight of the war lifted. He spoke of the thrill of the game, the joy of hitting a winning home run, and the euphoria that came with celebrating a hard-fought game. The laughter and the sense of normalcy felt like a balm for their wearied spirits. But shadows hung over their laughter, the reality of the war was never far behind. The camp had received news of battles lost and lives changed forever. As the recruits discussed the conflict, Joe felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. Each story shared carried with it the understanding that they were not just training, they were gearing up for a confrontation that would change everything. The moments of levity were precious but fleeting, and soon, the grim realities of war would demand their full attention. One fateful morning, the recruits were called for a special briefing. Joe stood in formation, the sunlight glinting off the polished brass of their rifles, listening intently as their commanding officer outlined their first deployment. Joe's heart raced as he absorbed the magnitude of the moment. This was no longer a training exercise, it was the real deal. They would be sent to the front lines, where courage and sacrifice would take center stage. As the briefing concluded, Joe felt a mixture of fear and resolve. Each man around him had a role to play, and he understood the importance of unity. "We're all brothers in this," he reminded his fellow recruits. "We fight for each other, for our families back home, and for the freedom we cherish." His words, while simple, resonated deeply. They would face the unknown together, and they would draw strength from one another. Soon after, they began their journey to the front, and Joe's heart swelled with a sense of purpose. The sights and sounds of the countryside blurred as they traveled, the landscape painted in hues of green and brown. Yet, beneath the beauty lay the harsh reality of war, a reality that would soon unveil itself. The moment they arrived, the air crackled with tension. The sounds of artillery in the distance served as a grim reminder of their mission. Joe felt the weight of the rifle in his hands, a reminder that he was not just a baseball player anymore, he was a soldier, tasked with protecting the ideals he believed in. The camaraderie that had formed during training became their lifeline, a web of support that would carry them through the darkest moments. As days turned into weeks, Joe experienced the chaos of battle firsthand. The fear that once seemed distant now enveloped him, shaping his every thought and action. Yet, amid the turmoil, he found clarity. He discovered that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to confront it. Each encounter with the enemy became a test of his mettle and a testament to the bond he shared with his comrades. Together, they faced the unthinkable, relying on one another to stay grounded in the face of adversity. In the evenings, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Joe would sit with his fellow soldiers, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a campfire. They shared their hopes and fears, their dreams of returning home, and the lives they left behind. Joe often spoke of baseball, of sunny days spent on the field, and of the thrill of competition. His stories provided a momentary escape, a reminder of the world beyond the war-torn landscape they inhabited. But as time went on, the toll of conflict became evident. Joe witnessed the pain of loss, the sacrifice of friends, and the price of freedom. Each loss struck a chord deep within him, reminding him of the humanity they were fighting to protect. It was a heavy burden, one he was willing to bear for the sake of his brothers in arms. He realized that these men were not just his comrades, they were family, bound by a shared purpose that transcended the battlefield. With each passing day, Joe felt the weight of his previous life slip further away. The glory of the baseball diamond faded into the background, replaced by the harsh realities of war. Yet, in this new world, he found a different kind of strength, one that was rooted in sacrifice and resilience. He had traded his fame for duty, and in doing so, he had discovered an inner courage he never knew existed. As the war raged on, Joe DiMaggio became a symbol of hope, not just for his fellow soldiers, but for the values they fought to uphold. He embodied the spirit of perseverance, reminding everyone that even in the face of darkness, there was a flicker of light. The call to duty had changed him forever, but it had also awakened a profound sense of purpose, a testament to the sacrifices made in the name of freedom. As he continued to navigate the trials of war, Joe held tight to the belief that one day, they would return home. And with that hope, he found the strength to carry on. If you appreciate these stories of courage and sacrifice during times of war, consider subscribing to our channel for more tales that honor the heroes of the past. Joe pushed through the fatigue, each day reminding himself that his sacrifice had a purpose. He flew time and again, mastering complex maneuvers that would be crucial in the coming battles. The roar of his aircraft became a second heartbeat, a reminder of the commitment he had made. He could no longer think of himself as just Joe DiMaggio, the baseball star. He was now Joe DiMaggio, the soldier, a man who would fight for the values he held dear. The days blurred together, and soon they all faced the final test, a live combat exercise designed to prepare them for the chaos of actual war. As they suited up on that fateful morning, the atmosphere was electric, charged with a mixture of excitement and dread. Joe glanced around at his fellow pilots. They had shared laughter and tears, and now they were bound by a singular purpose. The stakes were higher than ever, and each of them understood that this was no mere game. The sound of engines starting filled the air, each roar echoing the reality they were about to enter. As Joe took his position in the cockpit, a sense of calm washed over him. He had learned to compartmentalize fear, to transform trepidation into focus. The pre-flight checks were swift, efficient, and soon he found himself soaring into the sky, the world below shrinking into a patchwork of green and brown. The exhilaration of flight was a familiar friend, yet the knowledge that danger lay ahead loomed large in his mind. The exercise began, and as they flew in formation, Joe felt the brotherhood of the pilots strengthen. They moved as one, sharing the thrill of altitude, yet each knew the grim reality that loomed just beyond the horizon. Their practice simulated the conditions they would face in combat, and every turn, every dive, was a reminder of the lives at stake. Joe focused on his training, recalling the words of his instructors, who had drilled into them the importance of precision and teamwork. As they dove into simulated enemy territory, Joe's heart raced. The sound of simulated gunfire crackled through the radio, and he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He could almost hear the voices of his comrades, the laughter from the mess hall, the stories of home. Those moments of connection had forged bonds that transcended their military training. They were no longer mere pilots, they were brothers united in a cause greater than themselves. The exercise escalated, and chaos erupted as they engaged with enemy aircraft in a fierce dogfight. Joe found himself dodging and weaving, his instincts kicking in as he relied on the skills he had honed over the months. His focus sharpened, the world outside the cockpit fading into a blur. In that moment, he was not the baseball superstar but a soldier, fighting alongside his brothers in arms. After what felt like an eternity, the exercise concluded. The planes returned to base, their landing gear touching down on familiar ground. But for Joe, nothing felt the same. The experience had changed him, revealing the stark realities of war. He had witnessed the fragility of life and the strength of the human spirit. He was a soldier now, transformed by the experience, carrying with him not just the weight of his own sacrifices but the stories of those he had come to care for deeply. As the days passed, Joe prepared for the inevitable deployment. The mood among the pilots shifted, becoming more somber. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing fears and hopes, knowing that more than just their skills would be tested in the battles ahead. Joe took comfort in the camaraderie, drawing strength from the men around him. They all faced the unknown together, and each day, they reminded one another of the importance of their mission. The day came when they received their orders. Joe stood with his fellow pilots, the reality of war now palpable in the air. They would be deployed to the Pacific, where the fighting was fierce, and the stakes were high. As they prepared to leave, Joe felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He thought of San Francisco, the bustling streets, and the warmth of the people he loved. Yet he knew he was leaving to protect those very lives, to stand against tyranny and injustice. In the days leading up to their departure, Joe immersed himself in training, determined to be ready for whatever lay ahead. He spent hours in the simulator, practicing dogfights and emergency maneuvers. The camaraderie among the pilots was stronger than ever, forged in the fires of shared purpose and impending danger. They laughed together, shared stories of their lives before the war, and spoke of dreams for the future, all while knowing that each day could be their last. As they boarded the planes bound for battle, Joe took a moment to reflect. He thought of his family, his friends, the life he had left behind, and the life he was fighting for. He was no longer just a man who had traded one form of glory for another, he was a soldier with a mission. The thrill of the flight was now intertwined with a sense of duty, a profound understanding that the world was counting on them. As the aircraft roared to life and lifted off, Joe felt a mix of emotions, fear, determination, and a fierce love for his country. The clouds parted below, revealing the vast ocean that lay ahead, an expanse that felt both inviting and treacherous. The journey into the unknown had begun, and Joe DiMaggio, once a symbol of hope on the baseball diamond, would become a beacon of courage in the skies above. With each passing mile, Joe's resolve strengthened. He understood that what lay ahead would not only test his skills as a pilot but also challenge his very beliefs about duty, honor, and sacrifice. He had traded the cheers of the crowd for the roar of engines, but in doing so, he had discovered something far more profound: his purpose. As they flew into the horizon, the air thick with uncertainty, Joe embraced his new identity, knowing that whatever awaited him, he was ready to face it, not just as a hero, but as a man who had chosen to stand up for a better world. As the story of Joe DiMaggio continues, one can't help but wonder how the war would shape him, how the battles would change everything he had ever known. For those who wish to witness this journey, to understand the depth of sacrifice and the spirit of brotherhood forged in the skies, subscribe to our channel and join us as we explore the compelling tales of heroes like Joe DiMaggio, who fought not just for glory, but for the dreams of so many. Bringing with it news that was hard to bear. Each time the sergeant's voice broke the stillness of the evening, it was as if a weight settled heavier on their shoulders. They were reminded that the lives they had left behind were fading like the embers in the fire, and the world outside their camp was one of chaos and uncertainty. As they prepared for deployment, Joe felt a tension in the air that was unlike anything he had experienced on the baseball diamond. There were no cheering fans or bright stadium lights here, only the somber knowledge that their next steps could lead them into the heart of battle. The excitement of camaraderie was now tinged with anxiety, fear, and the unrelenting specter of mortality. Days turned into weeks, and as they entered the fray, the sounds of gunfire replaced the cheers of the crowds. Joe's heart raced as he held his rifle, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Each time the whistle blew, he moved with precision, his instincts sharpened by the hours spent training. He wasn't just Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player anymore, he was Private DiMaggio, a soldier fighting for a cause much greater than himself. In the heat of battle, the lessons learned on the field proved invaluable. Joe quickly became known for his steady aim and quick reflexes, but it was his resilience that truly set him apart. When bullets whizzed past him, his mind would flash back to the pressure of a final game, the weight of expectation resting on his shoulders. He had learned to shut out the noise, to focus on the task at hand, and to trust in his training. But amidst the chaos, the horrors of war were relentless. Joe witnessed pain and suffering that would haunt him long after the war was over. He saw friends fall, their laughter extinguished in an instant, and he felt the gut-wrenching sorrow that came from losing those he had come to know and love. Each loss was a reminder of the fragility of life, and he fought to honor their memories by fighting bravely. One fateful day, Joe found himself in a dangerous position, pinned down by enemy fire. The fear was palpable, he could taste it in the air. He remembered his teammates back home, the ones who cheered him on, and in that moment, he summoned all the courage he had. With a deep breath, he moved forward, his heart pounding, the weight of the rifle heavy in his hands. He worked with his squad, coordinating movements, supporting one another in a way that mirrored the teamwork he had known on the field. In the thick of battle, Joe took a hit, and time seemed to freeze. The world around him blurred, the sounds muffled as he hit the ground. Confusion enveloped him, and for a moment, he felt detached from reality. But just as in baseball, the instinct to fight kicked in. His comrades rushed to his side, bandaging his wounds and offering words of encouragement. "You'll be all right, DiMaggio. Just hold on." They carried him to safety, and as he lay in the makeshift medical tent, a flood of emotions washed over him. Pain was mingled with gratitude, and just like in the locker room after a hard game, he found solace among his teammates. They rallied around him, sharing stories and laughing as they always did. It was a lifeline in the storm of chaos that surrounded them. Recovering from his injuries took time, and it felt like an eternity before he could rejoin his unit. The war continued to rage, and each day was a reminder of the sacrifices they were all making. But Joe emerged from his recovery with a renewed sense of purpose. He was determined to fight not just for himself, but for every soldier who had ever put their life on the line. As the final battles unfolded, Joe found himself changed in ways he had never anticipated. The glory he once sought in the baseball arenas was now replaced by a deeper understanding of duty and sacrifice. He had traded the cheers of the crowd for the silence of the battlefield, but he gained a sense of pride that transcended the applause. When the war came to an end, the world erupted in celebration. The streets were filled with jubilant crowds, but for Joe, the victory was bittersweet. He had survived, but he carried the weight of loss and the memories of battles fought. The joyful cheers felt distant, as if they belonged to another life. He had returned home, but the man who stepped off that ship was not the same young athlete who had left. In the years that followed, Joe tried to navigate his new reality. Baseball called to him, but the game felt different. The thrill of the sport was overshadowed by the shadows of war that lingered in his mind. He often found himself lost in thought, reflecting on the comrades who didn't make it back, their faces forever etched in his memory. Yet, in those moments of solitude, he found a renewed purpose. Sharing his story became a way to honor those who had fought alongside him, to remind others of the cost of freedom and the importance of camaraderie. He spoke to groups, bringing his experiences to life, hoping to impart the same lessons he had learned, the value of perseverance, the strength of teamwork, and the courage it takes to stand up for what one believes in. As the years rolled on, Joe DiMaggio became not just a baseball legend, but also a voice for veterans. He encouraged younger generations to appreciate the freedoms they enjoyed, to understand the sacrifices made to protect those liberties. Through it all, one truth remained clear: Joe had traded glory for duty, and in that exchange, he discovered a depth of character and resilience that would define him far beyond his days on the diamond. And as you reflect on this incredible journey, consider subscribing to our channel to hear more stories of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of those who lived through one of history's most challenging times. Your support helps keep these important tales alive for future generations. As Joe DiMaggio soared into the skies, the adrenaline coursed through his veins, a sharp contrast to the cold steel of the aircraft that enveloped him. Each pilot knew they were no longer just men with dreams of baseball glory, they were warriors prepared to face the uncertainty of war. The sun shone brightly that day, yet the warmth it offered felt distant amid the weight of their shared mission. The roar of the engines drowned out any lingering thoughts of home, but memories of the diamond, the cheers of fans, and the familiar scent of fresh-cut grass lingered in his mind, urging him to remember who he was beneath the uniform. The exercise commenced with rapid precision. Joe and his fellow pilots dove into their roles with fervor, simulating maneuvers that would soon be executed for real. They weaved through the clouds, their formations tight, mimicking the air battles that would define their futures. Every twist and turn was a test of skill and courage, and Joe embraced each challenge with a fierce determination. He could hear the voices of his instructors echoing in his mind, urging him to stay sharp and focused. "Stay as one unit," they would say, "and you'll make it through." As they reached the simulated enemy territory, the atmosphere transformed. The thrill of practice faded, replaced by a palpable tension that felt almost tangible. Joe took a deep breath, grounding himself. The camaraderie among the pilots was comforting. They glanced at each other, knowing that they were all in this together, ready to face whatever may come. Joe tightened his grip on the controls and pushed the aircraft into a sharp turn, feeling the familiar pull of gravity and the exhilaration of flight. But then, within the confines of their simulation, chaos erupted. An unexpected alert blared through the cockpit, and Joe's heart raced. Their formation splintered, and the reality of war became as clear as the blue sky above. "Maintain formation," shouted their squadron leader over the radio, but the words felt like a distant echo amid the whirlwind of activity. Joe fought against panic as he recalibrated his focus, remembering the training drills that had prepared him for such moments. In the heart of the exercise, Joe spotted a fellow pilot struggling to regain control of his aircraft. The other man's plane was spiraling, and Joe's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, he broke from the formation, veering off course to assist his comrade. He could feel the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. It was no longer just about his own life but also about saving someone else's. His heart pounded louder than the engines, and as he approached the other pilot, he called out, "I'm coming to help." "You!" Steeling himself, Joe maneuvered behind the struggling aircraft. Sensing the urgency, he shouted instructions over the radio, guiding his friend through the turbulence. "You've got this. Pull back on the stick." Joe's voice cut through the chaos, a lifeline among the disarray. The other pilot's plane stabilized, and together they regained some semblance of order. "You're back in control," Joe confirmed, pride swelling in his chest as they flew in tandem once more. As the exercise continued, Joe felt a profound shift within him. The thrill of flying was still there, but it was now blended with a deeper understanding of what it meant to be part of something greater. The lessons of teamwork, sacrifice, and bravery resonated within him. The laughter shared in the mess hall and the late-night discussions about dreams and fears solidified into a bond that transcended their backgrounds. Joe was no longer just Joe DiMaggio, the baseball player. He was Joe DiMaggio, a soldier committed to his fellow men. After the exercise concluded, the pilots returned to base, adrenaline still humming in their veins. The debriefing was intense, with each pilot recounting their experiences. Joe listened as others shared tales of near misses and quick thinking, but as he spoke, a sense of humility washed over him. He had learned that heroism was not just about glory but often lay in the quiet moments of support and sacrifice. The war would not only test their skills as pilots but also their character as human beings. Days turned to weeks, and the reality of their training began to sink in. The specter of war loomed ever closer, and with it came the realization that the safety of their loved ones depended on their readiness. Joe found himself writing letters home, sharing tales of training and camaraderie but carefully omitting the darker shadows of their reality. He wanted his family to remain safe in their ignorance, to continue believing in the hero they had once idolized. But the man he had become was forever altered by the trials of war. Then came the day when the orders arrived, a final briefing before heading into combat. A silence fell over the room, thick with unspoken fears and hopes. As the officers laid out the mission, Joe felt a heavy weight settle on his heart. They were no longer playing at war, it was about to become real. The laughter that once filled the air was replaced by a somber understanding of the stakes involved. In the days that followed, Joe prepared himself for the unknown, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From the baseball fields of California to the skies of war, he had transformed, molded by the experiences that had tested his spirit. As he donned his flight jacket, he looked in the mirror and saw not just a soldier, but a man who had embraced duty over personal glory. The moment finally arrived. The engines roared to life, and as Joe's aircraft lifted off the ground, he cast a final glance at the land he had known, the dreams he had once pursued, and the uncertain future ahead. The sky opened up before him, a vast expanse of blue filled with both peril and promise. He had traded the cheers of a crowd for the camaraderie of his fellow soldiers, and as he flew into the unknown, he carried with him the spirit of those who believed in him. In the end, Joe returned from the war, forever changed by his experiences. He bore the scars of battle, but he also carried the strength that came from sacrifice and brotherhood. Though the world would once again know him as the baseball legend, he could no longer simply be defined by his past achievements. The war had taught him that true heroism was not about the accolades but about the quiet resolve to stand for what one believed in. He would always remember the skies, the laughter of his comrades, and the lessons learned in the heart of chaos. As Joe stepped back onto the familiar earth, he knew he had a new calling, to share his story, to honor those who fought alongside him, and to remind the world that sometimes, the greatest heroes are those who embrace their duty with unwavering courage. If you wish to hear more stories of bravery, sacrifice, and the human spirit, consider subscribing. Together, we can keep the memories alive for generations to come.